I just have some agita over anything that becomes obsessive cult-like.
To recap for our millions of listeners, the last podcast, you said you have a list. And on this list, no pickleballers. This is like your list of a perfect partner, no pickleball. And then that we got hate mail from across the nation. You came on today to go on an apology tour,
Uh-huh.
and in your apology tour, you called them a cult.
I did.
This is your apology?
No,
Okay.
come on. This is a
Okay.
kind of apology. This is like, I get it, bro. I don't hate you, bro. I just think, I have some chest pain over anything that gets kind of obsessed. They get obsessed about it. It's obsessive. That's it.
The Hollow Buddy. And we all feel hollow sometimes.
Well, thank you for that apology, Sylvia. Let's move on to Jessica. How do you feel about pickleball, first of all?
Well, shouldn't
I
we,
think that's
shouldn't
going to
we
be our
tell
first
folks?
question.
Shouldn't we tell folks first?
Well, let's tell everyone who she is.
Okay, so Jessica Nowaski, she served as a deputy chief of police in Mountain View with the Mountain View Police Department in California. She retired in 2021. She did some amazing things, served in a variety of assignments. She did a lot of amazing stuff. She served on a planning committee for the come on, Moyer, the Women Leaders in Law Enforcement Symposium. She's been a presenter. She's been a coach. She's been a leader. We should actually post this bio that she has in this incredible body of work so people can see it. I will merely say that Jessica does what she says she's going to do. She leads with character and with authenticity, and that drew her to start Athena Coaching when she retired. So I'm just going to knock it off there and just say, Jessica Nowaski, you have been someone that we've been watching and that we have been following for decades. So welcome to the Hollow Bunny podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and before you answer the question about pickleballers from Kristen, I gotta say, you know what a hollow bunny is, and briefly, it's somebody that looks shiny and full and is going to contribute, but they're empty, they're hollow. There's not much substance. So here we go. Let's kick this off. Let's hear the applause for Jessica Nowaski, who knows what a hollow bunny is.
Welcome.
Thank you. I am so excited to see both of you. I actually consider both of you influencers in my life and mentors to me. So when I heard you guys were doing a podcast together, I did my little happy dance. I was so excited. So this is really cool.
And then you listened to it and went, oh, God, that's terrible.
It's not true at all.
Hey, Jessica, for the record, we are considered explicit. So if a random F-bomb or something shoots out of your mouth, don't worry. This is not the kind of podcast people listen to when they're dropping their kids off at school. They listen when they drop the little, miscreants off at school, and then they get real with us. So you just do
right
you.
on. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So congratulations on your retirement. I know I've already said that to you, but that deserves a congratulatory on the service to the citizens of Mountain View. And so I'm interested to know, because I actually don't know this, what was the transition into coaching and mentoring? What was the idea behind that? Had you been doing it before and it was just a natural transition, or was this something that you just stood up after your retirement?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, actually. It was definitely a transition that started right after I promoted to captain in between 2014-15. And at the time, my chief looked at me when I joined the exec staff and said, hey, we really need to focus on leadership development throughout the organization. We had lots of pending retirements in the next, 2 to 3 years. And we saw, we needed to really build a bench that was going to be able to come in behind those folks in those leadership roles and take those positions. And so I thought, oh gosh, this is the nudge I needed for my chief at the time to really explore what that next step was going to be for me. So it launched me into a master's program. So within the master's program, I did it was a leadership master's program with an emphasis on coaching and facilitation. And that was really my first introduction to, okay, what is this really going to look like? And I brought it into our organization and started teaching people coach-like skills for supervisors and managers for leadership development. And that was my first introduction. So I actually weaved it into the work I was doing internally within the police department. And then later when I retired, loved it so much and thought, man, this is really impactful work. This is what I want to do. So I went back to school. I retired, went back to a professional coaching program, and just about to be certified as a professional coach.
First of all, that is amazing. And second of all, let's give some love to that chief that you have just described, because we have a mutual affection for that man. So let's just drop his name, because this is precisely why we started this Hollow Bunny podcast, because I can tell you that Max Bosell is not a Hollow Bunny. There, I said his name, but say a few words about that, because he's the one that kicked this off for you and set you on a trajectory. And I think it's so important that we talk about great leaders that push us in the right direction.
So Max actually was right in that transition. When I promoted, I was actually with Chief Scott Vermeer for 6 more months. And then Max took over and continued looking at me going, let's do this. So he was the chief behind and supported all of the rollout, the initiative, my master's program. And he really did have my back through the whole thing. So it was really a combination of a couple of people. Scott Vermeer was the one that looked at me and said, okay, we need this. And he wasn't necessarily thinking of a master's program, but once I got into it, it was amazing. And Max was right there all the way through.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I met Max at management school years and years ago, I think we were lieutenants. And when you see somebody and you think he's got that thing and he focuses on what is right. And Kristen, where did you meet Max?
Oh, where did I meet Max? When I went to
That's a risky question.
what's that Ivy League school that I went to? Oh, Harvard. Oh, that's where I went. I went to Harvard for 3 weeks.
Got it. Good to know. All the smart people. So Jessica, Max, Scott Vermeer nudged you, and Max really supported this effort. I think when you retire, when a lot of folks retire, the three of us have retired from our primary job, and some of us, Kristen's off speaking and influencing around the United States and really internationally about mitigating threats and harm. And I do speaking with healthcare and with other folks and executive development. And, I'm a full-time cop again. And you are really influencing people in this coaching space. And do you think there's any validity to this notion that once you're a little bit older, you have a different wisdom and a different way of seeing the leadership landscape and the behaviors and characters that are necessary?
Yeah, I think along with just time in the seat, you have more to reflect on and look back. And I mean, hindsight is, 2020. So I think you're able to look back. I mean, I think what's really interesting since I've retired, I say I've retired from law enforcement. I do not feel like I'm in retirement, because that's a whole other ball of wax. I think that's a loaded word, because I am, doing this coaching stuff and, full time with my kids and trying to stay focused on that. And so we're keeping quite busy, but it's weird. In the last year, I think I've had more brain capacity to really reflect on my entire career. And there were things that were happening in my career at the time I thought contributed to X, Y, or Z. But as I'm reflecting, it's like, no, it was a blend of things. It wasn't just the environment and the way people really thought about me or treated me, but it was also my response to that. And that's really where I'm kind of sitting in that space right now, kind of like, oh my gosh, if I only knew back then. And there were key moments in my history with lots of mentors that I had that helped support me along the way to point out that reflective piece. But yeah, it's an interesting space to be in the last year and a half.
Yeah, without
That's
a doubt.
absolutely remarkable.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Well, no, and I was just going to say it's interesting because we're in the same place. We both retired in 2021. And I really didn't understand. And they say that, that our wisdom, is youth is wasted on the young. And it's so true. But when you can sit and reflect, and that's exactly what I did. And I started to realize here were my missteps. And most of the time they were, involving my reaction to something. And if I could do it all over again, but that's why they call it reflection, and I absolutely agree with you about retirement. It's such a word that, I want to just eradicate, because I've a lot of people who have left a profession or a career have not retired in that sense. It's just such a restful connotation. And many of us are still plugging along. So I appreciate you saying that.
Jessica, you have really connected with folks about this space and about this work and in this work. What have you found to be super compelling, or the most frequent gap that folks have in terms of leadership right now?
Yeah, you know what? I think the theme around communication and how to communicate, making sure that your impact really matches your intent. And so I have a few clients that are really struggling with, they feel like being a direct communicator is, in their value system, and that's what they want to do. And I think they miss a piece to bring in. It's like, why are you being a direct communicator? Because you have a lot of passion around getting it right. It's really important that, our officers are trained to do the right thing, and that we're there to support each other. And so when they're such a direct communicator, and it offends people and it comes off wrong, they really got to own that. And it's like, how can you? And that's where the coaching skills come in. Is you wrap that in where you practice really deep intentional listening, where you suspend your own voice of judgment and kind of hit the pause button on your narrative and listen to what people are saying, listen to what they're not saying, be curious longer. It's those types of things that I think need to be brought, more into the workplace, especially around supervision.
Sure. Kristen and I talk about this a lot. We talk about this, Viktor Frankl. All of us have read Man's Search for Meaning, where Viktor Frankl offered that between stimulus and response lies choice, and therein lies our freedom, right? And the stimulus is someone asking a question, it is them presenting, it is the anger, it's rage, it's anxiety, it's all the stuff that's out there in the environment. And between that stimulus and the response from a leader, that's where our freedom lies. That's where that secret sauce is, right? That's
So,
where the
yes.
just the magic is. So what you're talking about is a direct link to that. It's a link to this mindfulness practice that gets us to notice and to pause and to be in this space. So, okay, if that's the biggest gap, what are you doing with it? What do you tell all the Hollow Bunny podcast leaders about, this space when they're thinking, wow, this is kind of what I struggle with? If they're thinking that,
Yeah.
how do you coach that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you meet them where they are, because you have to find out how they perceive their own struggles. And there's always going to be some symptom described that, if you sit with it long enough and help that person unpack it by asking really well thought out, open-ended questions, it helps them go deeper, and then really taps into the way that they're meaning making. It gets to the heart of, why do you think that? What evidence do you have to support that? Is it a limiting belief about yourself? Is it a message you were given years ago and you held on to it for dear life because you thought it defined you, and all of a sudden you realize that's that may have been a little part of me, but that's not the whole package. And why am I focusing on this little part of me when there's so much more? So it really helps a person pull away, when you're in it. A fish doesn't know they're swimming in water, but when you zoom out and you're able to take a look at the whole scaffolding of who you are, you could then have choice to draw forward those parts of you that are going to serve you better. That compassionate piece that we
Yeah.
all have, that sometimes we leave on the back burner because we feel like, oh, if we're compassionate and we bring care or the word love into the conversation, we're weak, or we're not strong enough, right? And it's like, no, that's a part of you. We need to bring all those things forward in our leadership. And then it's also the other piece of that for me is working really hard to walk my talk. And that's not easy to do. I'm not saying this work is easy, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
Wow, wow, wow. So do you sit beside people and have firsthand observation?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the collateral kind of consequences that's happening is, just in my own relationship with my husband, I'm trained to be a coach. I show up more coach-like. I'm not intending to sit and coach him or anything like that, but just last night, he made a statement, and I reflected something back and just affirmed what he said. I just affirmed it. I didn't judge it. I didn't
Yeah.
try to fix it. I just affirmed it. And he looks at me and goes, "Are you coaching me?" And I said, "No, I don't need to coach you. I'm just supporting you," which is also part of coaching, by the way. But it wasn't that I was trying to do anything. So there are ways when you show up genuine to who you are, when you
Yes.
put your emphasis on getting it right versus being right, and you shift it to a more collaborative mindset, then people are going to feel that and they're going to see you in a different light. You're going to hold space for the people that are in your family or the people that you work for you in such a different way. It's going to impact the culture and the morale and go all the way down to the policies and the way the officers feel when they go out into the field and they communicate with the public. I mean, isn't that what it's all about at the end of the day, is making us more effective?
So, Jessica, you said something there that I want to draw out quickly about, the using, compassion and the word, God forbid, love, to show a little bit of vulnerability. They call those, quote, soft skills, which is so interesting because they're not soft at all. And I find that especially as women in leadership, that that we can a little more easily bring those in. But then when I think about the best bosses I have ever had, male or female, they have that quality. They show it's care and concern for people. So what do you say, and this is for both of you, for those that feel as though they can't show emotion or compassion, or God forbid use the word love? And I tell people all the time, you have to love your people more than you love your position.
Word.
And it's met with a little bit of like, whoa, love your people. But man, I mean, to me, that is the secret sauce. So why do we view these as soft skills?
Yeah, I hate the reference that the soft skills are soft. Like I hate that it brings around an idea of weakness. And I remember a moment when I was acting police chief and we had a traffic officer involved in a collision and had been transported to the hospital. And I went and checked on him, and he's okay, and he's back riding his motor, so everything turned out. But it was we were getting a flood of concern from the officers in. I was coordinating with him and his family, and I had to put out an email to the department on his behalf. And in that email, the right thing to say was, he really appreciates all the love and concern you're giving him. And I paused at the word love and thought, should I say this? I just can't, I will never forget that moment that I'm contemplating in that space using the word love. And I went, heck yeah, I'm using the word love. That's exactly what is called for right here. And I put it out there, and it wasn't a big deal and nobody even flinched, right? But in me, in my own meaning making, I thought, oh my gosh, is this going to be taken the right way, or is this the right word? And I think I'm going to judge it right now. I think when you show up caring about people as human beings, not best friends, you're not judging them in their work performance, that's a whole different ballgame, but you just respect and care about them as a human being, that's better. One, it feels better because every human being, unless you have some sociopathic diagnosis or something, everybody needs that. It's a fundamental human need to feel those things. And if you're in denial of that, well, then maybe coaching is definitely not the space for you. I would highly recommend therapy there. So if you're in denial of that, but it is just better. It just is more human. And that's what we need. That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, more humanism. It's the human condition. And it's so interesting that we are in the business of people, right? I read this, there's a book by Kent Williams and Ed Wahicki. I'm gonna have to remember the name of it. But they're both longtime in law enforcement, and they talk about what we do as police officers is we quote serve and protect, and yet that he draws out that serve is sometimes we fall short in service, and we see that all the time, sometimes the way police officers treat people, and protect, that we're not really doing a great job. We love to believe that we are protectors, but if that were true, then crime wouldn't happen, right? And so what he posits is that we should deliver dignity to people, in compassion, and no matter what the plight is, even if you can't prevent the crime, you can't quote protect. And I loved that piece. It's just it's turning the paradigm ever so slightly, and because we are in the people business, we respond to people at their worst times, and as leaders, we also are in the people business, and so we have to show that compassion, and we have to show up in that very same way for our people if we expect them to deliver that dignity and compassion to those we serve. And it's so hard for me to understand how people just don't get that.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, you can't do that in a community if you have a fractured, caustic, toxic culture internally. And that's where I see coaching coming in, bringing that piece, teaching people to hit the pause button. We tend to adopt a command and control style of management and leadership, and that is, we need more discernment. That is very necessary when the what is hitting the fan, but 99% of the other time, and depending on where you work, of course, that you don't need to treat your people with that command and control. And that's, I think, where the lines get blurred in law enforcement, where we don't stop and say, what is really calling us in this moment? As I work with my people internally, or teach them how to do an investigation or review the reports or whatever the tasks are, it's within that space that we really have the opportunity to shift our perspective and be more human and more compassionate with each other, and listen better and ask better questions and stay curious longer. Because when you have a healthier internal culture, then you have it's just like a family dynamic. You have a broken stuff going on in the family, the kids are going to show up and have problems at school. We see that in psychology and reports all the time. It's a similar thing. If you don't have people taking care of people internally, you cannot expect officers to go into the field and do that high level work and show people dignity when they don't feel like they're being given dignity by their own bosses.
Right. Kristen does some organizational assessments. And Kristen, haven't you found that very thing that Jessica is talking about in terms of what degrades an organization?
Oh, yeah. And this is speaking to what you were talking about earlier about reflection. I am now in a position where I go into police departments and I determine, what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And the weakness is it's always the same. It's just changed the organization, but it's always the same. It's the lack of care and concern from leadership. They just don't care about us. And the failure to communicate. We hear things from other places, and it's like those two things, just caring and communicating, are so important in an organization. And listen, and this is one of the things I learned at Harvard when I went there for 3 weeks, is that leadership is about disappointing people at sometimes. You're going to make decisions that they're going to upset people, because you're setting policy, you're holding people accountable, you're doing all of the things. You have to worry about internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. However, if you communicate the why behind the do, and you also put yourself in the place of those who are the ones who are going to be carrying out the policy, and then and really think about that and explain it to them, I find that most people in our organization say, okay, I understand that now. I may not agree with it. I may not be happy with it. So that's also about leadership. It isn't just a love fest. It's also about making difficult decisions. And, and the honest truth is, those who want to be loved are going to be bad leaders. Those who are set on being feared are bad leaders. It's about being respected. And, that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jessica actually presented her findings. She did an action research project regarding managing coaching. And Jessica, you got to present those findings at Columbia University. Another Ivy League, Kristen Zeman. There you go. And so Jessica, really, with those findings and how you presented your work there, and you presented at the International Leadership Association conference in Canada. Big shout out to our peeps up in Canada. What did you find in that action research? Did it really break apart this very thing that you're talking about? And then how talk to us about that?
Yeah, we were lucky to have a citywide assessment happening at the same time. So we had results from an assessment, and we're able to look at our department results. And several of there were like a core four complaints, two of which you just mentioned, that care and that communication. That people didn't feel command staff really were concerned for them, and so we had that data to kind of move forward with our intention in the project. And basically what the project was, I happened to be the captain over field operations at the time. So I brought that project and asked for voluntary participation from my lieutenants in the patrol division and a newly promoted sergeant. And they were all willing. So we embarked on how do we ourselves learn some fundamental coaching skills and then go out and practice those coaching skills. We were already meeting once a week. So every other week, we
Wow.
just added a little bit of time to the meeting to talk about our experiences regarding the research and what we're finding. And we just had our own experiences. Like, if you have a somewhat disgruntled employee, you could pretty much guess what a conversation is going to be if you're going to confront them with something. So we would actually plan, what's the best way? What do you think this person needs from you to bring this hard conversation up with them? What do you think they need to feel comfortable in this space so that they can actually open up and talk to you about it? So we would plan that, and they would go then have those conversations and come back, and their eyes would be like this, like, I can't believe it went well. Like, I didn't think it was going to go well. And we sat and we talked, and there are some employees, and I'm not saying this is a panacea, it is not a catch-all for everything. There are going to be some employees that you are going to need to apply performance management. It just is a fact. They're not going to be receptive to coaching. Not everybody is, in a coaching mindset. So let me say that as an asterisk to the side. But I think we were all pretty surprised at the positive results. And I was skeptical, thinking, yeah, we'll see if this coaching stuff has any teeth to it. But man, when I started practicing it more, my people were practicing it more, and then other people in the organization started getting curious about it more. And then we did another assessment, citywide assessment, a couple years later, and we had higher marks. Things were not as bad. Now, are they
Yeah.
perfect? Are they ever going to be perfect? No, of course not, but they improved. And that's when I was hooked. I was like, okay, this stuff works. This is the real deal. And I'm in because it is amazing.
I love what you were talking about there, because that is also one of the biggest failures in organizations, what I call lack of courageous leadership. Sitting down with people and having hard conversations with them. And that refers to the absence or the deficiency of bold and principled guidance from those in leadership positions. And that means having to sit down, and as you mentioned, sometimes it's performance, whatever it may be, but sitting down with people. And to me, that has been, over my career, the best gift I have ever received, as a leader who's sitting down with me and saying, hey, you're here, but in order to get to here, here's what you're going to have to do. And I very much appreciated that. But these conversations are so difficult for people to have. And once we get more comfortable with them, I believe that not only are our people going to get better, but that's how the entire organization gets better as a result of that courageous leadership.
Right. This all ties into this thing that we churn on all the time. And for each of our approaches, my core approach has been mindfulness. Meditation as a pathway to mindfulness, staying present, giving people space, noticing the stimulus, the freedom that lies in that space between stimulus and response, and then responding in a way that is heart-centered. It's not void of discipline. It's not void of the parameters of managing an organization, but I am coming from a space of love. I love you enough to have this conversation with you and to give you my firsthand observations of how you're showing up. And so for each of us, we have that, right? And what I'm hearing so incredibly from you, Jessica, is how coaching and having a coaching center has advanced the way that you led, the way that you coach people to lead, and it's effective. I call it my give a shit factor. I just give a shit more than, not like most people think is reasonable. Maybe that's maybe that just works for me. So what I'm hearing is this coaching thing is really profound.
It really is. And it's funny, the whole time I was working with it there, I was very aware and cognizant of I don't want this to be perceived as my pet project, right? That I want, true buy-in. I want these guys to be able to tell me, is this distracting? Because the other thing about doing this research project internally to the department was, you guys know, we are all so very busy. Everybody's plates are overflowing with reports and tasks and audits and you name it. We are really busy. And so the last thing I wanted to do was to add so much more work to their plate. So what coaching allows you to do is overlay a framework of the work that you already have to do. It's not adding work. It doesn't say you have to go out and have 10 times more conversations. It's really talking about the how. It
Yeah.
introduces a framework so it incorporates emotional intelligence, more effective communication. I mean, coaching really does touch on those things. So it's easy just to call it coaching, and it's not professional coaching. It's not void. That's why we call it manager as coach. And really, I don't even know if that's the right way. It's more coach-like skill sets that I'm kind of, now that I'm doing professional coaching, I realize that as a manager, there were times that I recognized a conversation didn't need my directive. It didn't need my expertise. It needed me to be a supportive, direct reporter, a supportive boss to the person coming to my office because I know they were working through the issue. So I was able to say, okay, how does that, you're balling and rolling around with this idea to solve this problem. How does it land for you? What are the things you're concerned about? What's the worst thing that could happen if you roll forward with this idea? And really asking those questions to go a little bit deeper is a way to approach problem solving, which is in and of itself. I mean, that's one of the responsibilities we have to do as leaders in law enforcement is to problem solve hard problems and dynamic problems. And so to have that mindset, it really does open up a space where you can be more mindful, more thoughtful, a better listener, to collaborate better. You don't have to be the one with all the answers all the time. You have a room full of really, intelligent, experienced professionals that if you know how to open the space up to ask for input and to thank them, even if the idea is kooky, thank them for the idea. It's information that you need when you're doing this problem solving. So I love it for all those reasons. And it's different when you're a manager because that's your primary role. It's not, I'm not asking people to be coaches and to relegate their position as a manager. It's not about that. It's how can you be more coach-like, more coach mindset to approach this.
Wow. Well, I got to say that this has really stimulated a lot of thinking on my part about my responsibility. And Jessica, it's amazing. You think you know somebody, and then you dive in like we have just had this deep dive with you. And I'm just totally impressed and moved by the work that you're doing and the continued endurance that you have to do the work and to contribute to help folks prepare for the rigors of the work. We have a responsibility. The speed in which things are occurring is different. The depth of disappointment, the capacity that leaders need to really engage with folks through difficulty and problems and dilemmas and all of this is really profound. I guess my final question for you, and I know Kristen has one, my final question for you is, if there's one thing that leaders need to fill their bunny, do you have an idea of what that would be?
There's an acronym that I came across in a book about a month ago that I love, and it's called Take Your Meds, MEDS, meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep. Those are
Ooh.
the fundamental pillars for everything else, for health, for everything else. You have to have those four pieces really. And if something's off or off kilter and not dialed in, it's going to be really hard for you to grow your capacity for the dynamic work in law enforcement. And so I would say make sure that those fundamental pieces are under you and that you have that, squared away. And if that is squared away, then start somewhere with your curiosity around what you need to be better. Ask the question as a leader, to your staff, what do you need from me to be better serving you, to support you? And I don't hear enough leaders asking that question. It's like, I'm happy to give feedback, but if there's not an opportunity, sometimes we hesitate, and nobody's going to give a chief or a deputy chief feedback unless they're asking for it. So ask for that feedback, and just take it and say thank you, and then go chew on it and work with your coach to make meaning of it and to see what your next steps are.
Yeah. So you're not going to say, so what evidence do you have to support that claim? You're not going to say
I've
that.
had to, no. Yeah. You're not gonna say that. Yeah, no, I think that we all know that. Think about the times where you're off kilter in your life, and were those four pillars being upheld? Were those being,
Wow.
lacking sleep, or not taking care of yourself, or not eating well? Those things have to be dialed in before you could do anything else. So I would say take care of yourself.
It's so important. It's interesting because when I talk to, especially police officers, their eyes kind of roll into the back of their head when I start to talk about sleep and exercise. And it's so interesting because in the book that Sil and I both love, The Second Mountain, by Arthur Brooks, he talks about when there are going to be times where you fall out of love with your work, and so it's in those times that you have to build structure, and that structure is exactly that. They're those things, taking care of yourself, and people don't recognize how much of that plays into the way that they respond to people in their workplace, and in just how they perform. They're optimizing and decision making and that alertness. And people really, they put themselves aside. They boast about how I only need 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and that is actually a complete falsehood, and they're not performing. So here, my last question to you is, there are a lot of leaders, or people out there that want to be better leaders, and we talk about are leaders born or are they made? And what do you say to people that want to get better? And what is the first thing that they can do in that place right now? Is I know I need to get better, I know things to work on. What's the first thing that they can do, just something small and incremental that can move them towards being a better leader?
Yeah, I would say just being curious about where it is that they need to focus their attention. So reflecting on the feedback that they've been given, and not just by the feedback in an evaluation from a frontline supervisor or a sergeant, but feedback about, from people that they trust, and looking for that common theme. So again, that idea of meeting people where they are, you have to have a true assessment of where you are and what is the most important thing for you to work on in that moment. So knowing, hey, I'm not a very strong communicator, or maybe I don't lean in enough and take, on challenges, or step up to opportunities like I should. If that's where you are, then look for the small places to step forward. There are podcasts that will support you. This podcast, there's tons of other podcasts that could be recommended. Read a book, take a class online, talk to other people. Really start where you are, figure out where you are, and pick something that works for you. There's no right place to start with this journey. You don't have to go back and get a master's degree in leadership to improve upon your leadership. If you're curious about coaching, hit me up on my website, and I'll connect you either with myself or another coaching colleague. Coaching is not there to fix people. It's there to elevate you. It's there to refine you. Think about professional athletes, right? They have to practice and work and hone their skills. It's the same thing. If you're going to be really good at what you're doing, you need to be in the business of honing your skills and paying attention. So that's what I will say. I can go on forever about that, so I probably should cut myself off.
No, don't. So what is your website?
AthenaCoach.com.
AthenaCoach.com. Well, I got to say, the borrowing from the book Atomic Habits, the aggregation of marginal gains, that tiny little improvement that one makes, just like you recommended, that could be one chocolate chip in a bunny, right? It's filling one piece of sweetness at a time, one movement at a time, one thing, and that aggregation will really advance folks.
Be intentional, be deliberate. That's the thing. Be intentional, be deliberate. Have a plan.
Perfect. So we've got your website. I also wanted to toss out, because you mentioned read a book. The book that I mentioned earlier is called Breach Point by Kent Williams with Ed Wahicki. Great book. So a great place
Awesome.
to start. Yes. So thank you so much for being on our little podcast today, Jessica. We very much, at least for me, my bunny is filled,
Ooh,
as always, with our guests. So thank you for that.
thank you.
And to all of our listeners out there, our bunnies, thank you, as always, for showing up. This podcast is produced by Ted Madden, and the song you are about to hear is written and performed exclusively for the podcast by my handsome and talented son, Jake Zeman, and his accomplished friends. If you like our podcast, please subscribe, review it, tell everyone you know about it. If you don't, just keep moving along. There's nothing more to see here. And don't forget to keep filling your own bunnies with substance and add substance to others. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
When you look inside, what do you find? Are you content to fall behind? When you lose your way and you fall, so why have courage and get ready to fight the hollow bunny? When the way ahead is covered in smoke and you're tired and scared and you're losing hope, you'll open your heart and your eyes to see a challenge and a question. Why not me? To fight the hollow bunny. And we all feel hollow sometimes, but the monsters are only in your mind. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're brave and kind, you'll be alright. If you fight the hollow bunny. When the challenge ahead scares you to death, you tame the imposter inside instead. To change the world, you've got to start small. It takes a leader to say, I don't know it all. And I know I'm gonna fall, but I'll pick it up and come back stronger. Failing forward and moving onward, doing the hard thing and the right thing, forever fighting the hollow bunny. And we all feel hollow sometimes, but the monsters are only in your mind. It's a tough pill to swallow, but if you're brave and kind, you'll be alright. If you fight the hollow bunny. If you're tough on the outside but empty within, something's gonna crack, you've gotta start again. You're tough on the outside but empty within, something's gonna crack, you've gotta start again. The monster